To most people, incel forums are disturbing. The language is abrasive, the tone is bitter, the posts range from heartbreaking to hateful, and sometimes both in the same paragraph. But here's what we don't talk about nearly enough. These incel forums, they feel safe. Not healthy, not kind or uplifting, but safe. And for the men inside, safety doesn't mean joy. It means predictability. It means no masks and no pretending and no pressure to perform or be palatable or say the right things just to be liked. In other words, these forums become digital bomb shelters, if you will. Not because they protect anyone from the world's violence, but more so because they offer a place to hide from the world's indifference. And that distinction matters because if we want to understand why people stay in these spaces, we have to stop fixating on the toxicity and start asking deeper questions about why these spaces feel like relief. Why does, for example, hopelessness feel like home? And why does bitterness feel safer than optimism? And why does rage feel more trustworthy than love? This is the paradox of incel communities. The paradox is they are often brutal to outsiders, but profoundly empathetic to each other. And not in the way that most of us would understand empathy, but in the sense of shared suffering and mirrored pain and a common language for despair. And let's not forget, most of these men, they didn't start out angry, I believe. They started out lonely and confused and longing to be seen, longing to be chosen, longing to believe that love was still possible for them. But they didn't find a place where that longing could land. So they got told instead to man up and to stop whining and to be more confident and to work out and to level up. And maybe they even tried. Maybe they got rejected nonetheless. Maybe they were invisible their whole lives until they logged on. And online, they weren't just visible, they were understood. Suddenly, they didn't have to explain themselves anymore. They didn't have to justify their sadness. They didn't have to earn the right to speak. There was this shared vocabulary, there was a shared pain, a shorthand, if you will, that said, you don't have to fake it here, we get it. And then that feeling, that we get it, that's far more addictive than hope. See, because hope is fragile. Hope disappoints. Hope requires you to keep trying. But despair lets you rest. Despair lets you stop performing. Despair gives you a reason to quit trying without feeling like a failure. And that is what makes incel forums so emotionally magnetic. They offer permission to stop hoping. And for someone who's spent their whole life hoping and hurting, that permission can feel like peace. And it's not the peace of healing, no, the peace of surrender. And when you've been in pain long enough, even surrender feels like safety. That's what we mean by a digital bomb shelter. It's not a place where you thrive. No, it's a place where you go to hide, where you survive, where you believe for once that you don't have to pretend to be okay. But there's a cost to that kind of safety, isn't there? Because safety, when it's built on despair, calcifies into belief, and belief, especially unexamined belief, becomes ideology, and when that language starts to shift, it goes from sadness to cynicism, from confusion to certainty, from grief to blame. And once blame enters the chat, empathy begins to die. And the person who once said, I just want someone to love me, now starts saying, women only want the chads, and society is broken, and I was never meant to be loved. And slowly their identity fuses with the pain. And it's no longer, I feel like an incel. Now it's become, I am an incel. And in that moment, the bomb shelter becomes more than a refuge. It now feels like home, a belief system, a lens through which the entire world is filtered. And this is why incel forums are so hard to leave. It's not because the worldview is appealing, but because the alternative is vulnerability in a world that never felt safe. And that's what most critics don't understand, I believe. They say, why don't they just log off, right? Why don't they get therapy? Why don't they stop being so bitter? But that assumes that the real world is offering them something better. And for many of these men, it isn't. The real world still feels rejecting and confusing and performative. And the pain that they carry isn't met with compassion. It's being met instead with mockery. So they go back underground, not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. And in the absence of safety, familiarity wins. See, if we want to interrupt this cycle, we have to stop treating incel forums like a virus to be eradicated and start treating them instead like symptoms of deeper wounds. You don't cure an infection by blaming the fever, and you don't dismantle toxic ideology by mocking the people who find solace in it. Instead, we have to get curious, not judgmental or not dismissive. We need to be curious and ask, what is this space giving them that nothing else has so far, right? Because here's what most of us miss. These forums, they are offering something real. They are offering connection, however dark. They offer recognition, even though it's distorted. They're offering honesty, however brutal it is. And those things matter, especially to someone who's been emotionally starving for such a long spell. You cannot compete with that by offering shallow advice or performative empathy. You're not ugly, you say, or just be yourself, you try to say. Or not all women are like that. While these might be well-meaning statements, they're emotionally hollow though. They don't speak to the real pain of these individuals. They don't hold the depth of what's actually being felt. To reach someone who's found comfort in despair, you have to be willing to meet them at the level of their longing, not their ideology, nor their logic, but at the level of their longing, however deep that is, that longing to be seen and to be chosen and to feel like their presence could matter to someone without having to become someone else. That's what most incels are trying to say underneath all of that bitterness. Would anyone love me as I am? And that question isn't exclusive to them. It's actually universal. It's the ache beneath all the performance and all the perfectionism and the posturing. And it's the ache to be chosen without any conditions. And when that ache isn't answered, it festers. And over time, it gets coated in armor that's made out of logic and rage and theory and withdrawal. But that armor doesn't make the longing go away, does it? It just hides it. And the more it hides, the more it hardens, until one day, what started like heartbreak looks a lot like hatred. But let me be clear, hatred is not the opposite of love. Hatred is a child of love that is unmet. Love that's contorted and starved for so long that it's turned into a blame. This is why incel forums matter. Not because they're right, but because they're revealing something. They are the emotional discharge of a deeper dysfunction, a social failure, a cultural blind spot around male vulnerability, disconnection, and grief. And the answer to all of that isn't mass deplatforming. It's not censorship, it's not shame. It's depth. It's understanding. It's the courage to say, tell me where it hurts before we rush into fix or fight. Because behind every black pill post is someone who once hoped. Behind every fatalistic thread is someone who tried to belong. And behind every bitter rant is someone, I believe, whose tenderness just went unanswered for far too long. So what can we do? I think we can start building spaces that don't demand perfection to belong. We build cultures where men can be vulnerable without the shame, where loneliness is not a punchline, and where grief is not punished, where connection isn't earned by beauty or bravado. Because if we don't build that, the bomb shelters will stay full. And worse, they'll start to feel like the only honest place that's left for these individuals. That's what we're up against. Not just ideology, but emotional scarcity, if you will. And if we want to reach those inside, we need to stop shouting at the surface and instead start listening to the soul. What are they really saying beneath the memes and the slang and the fatalism, right? What if we translated the language of despair for them? Women are only wanting chads? I feel like I'll never be good enough for love? The dating market is broken? I don't know how to connect with feeling or connection or being dismissed. I'm invisible. These are all these comments that they're saying. I haven't felt chosen in years, and I don't remember what it feels like. Life is over. I've stopped believing that anyone could ever want the real me. See, these are not entitled statements. That's despair that's poorly translated. And when despair has no safe place to land, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start believing that love is a lie, and that connection is for the other people, and that your only hope is to stop hoping. And that's when the damage deepens, not just to others, but to yourself as well, because self-hate is so corrosive. It doesn't just rob you of connection, it rewires like your perception. And the forms reflect that back to you, not just in what's said, but in what's normalized. Phrases like rope fuel or lie down and rot, right, become coping mechanisms, a way to laugh through the pain, to make numbness feel noble. But underneath all of it is someone who's waiting for a reason to believe again. Not in society, not in dating, but in their own worth. That's the real rebuild there. Not a glow up, and it's not a rebrand, it's not a dating strategy, but a rebuild of one's worth from the inside out. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about more here. See, if you've been told your whole life that being emotionally honest makes you weak, if you've learned that your worth is tied to performance, how attractive you are, how confident you seem, how well you man up, then a space that doesn't demand that, even if it's laced with bitterness, can feel like rescue. That's the irony of these forums. They validate the pain while subtly anchoring the belief that healing is no longer possible. That the only way to survive is to stop trying, to numb, to mock, to withdraw. But here's the problem with survival mode. It keeps you alive, but it doesn't let you live. And for many incels, that line gets blurred. They're not choosing to hate the world. They're in essence trying to protect themselves from the world. And the rage is like a mask, right? The memes are like smoke screens. The denialism is a coping mechanism, because vulnerability, like real vulnerability, feels too dangerous. Opening up to someone who might not get it, who might dismiss or reject you or pity you, that risk can feel like annihilation. So instead, the pain gets buried, coded into sarcasm, embedded in rage, and painted as a philosophy. And that's where the ideology becomes this armor. Because ideology says, you're not broken. You're just a victim of a rigged system. You're not lonely, you're rational. You're not aching, you're just awakening. And it feels empowering because it gives the pain a name. But it also gives it permanence, doesn't it? And the longer that you live inside that worldview, the harder it is to imagine your way out of it. And that's what makes these forums feel like bomb shelters. They're not filled with people who want to be angry, I don't think. They're filled with people who don't know where else to put the grief. And grief that's not met with compassion turns into something else, doesn't it? It becomes cynical, defensive, sharp-edged. And not because that's who they are, but because it's what they've learned to become, to survive, right? But survival is not the same as safety. And we have to be careful not to confuse the two. See, just because a space doesn't ask you to perform doesn't mean that it nurtures you. Just because it echoes your pain doesn't mean it helps you heal. And that's the turning point, I believe. That's where the conversation has to shift, not by pulling people out, but by offering them something better to walk toward. Because when people are only told what's wrong with them and where they are, but never given something better that feels real so that they'll stay, they won't try for it because they don't trust that alternative. So what does a better alternative look like? It looks like spaces, again, where men don't have to earn tenderness, and where love isn't performance-based, where grief is met with presence and not with pressure, where someone can say, I feel unlovable, and hear, you're not alone in that. It looks like rebuilding one's dignity, not through dating success or image or status, but through truth-telling, through letting men name what they're actually feeling without shame, without having to defend it, without having to wrap it up in humor or hide it in anger. Because the rebuild, this begins with honesty. Not public honesty, not like the broadcasted vulnerability, but the quiet, private, unglamorous truth being revealed. I feel unwanted, or I feel like no one sees me, or I feel like I've been carrying this pain for so long and I forgot what it feels like to be human again. That's where the healing starts, not with strategy, not with advice, but with witnessing. Someone sitting beside the ache, not trying to fix it, but refusing to let it fester in silence. That's intimacy. Not sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy. That's the kind that says, I see your pain and I'm not afraid of it. And that kind of presence, it does what an ideology can never do. It melts the armor, it softens the edges. It says you don't have to stay in this bomb shelter anymore. Because yes, the world is risky. Yes, the love can hurt. And yes, vulnerability is terrifying. But the alternative is emotional starvation. And starving people will eat whatever they can find, even if it's laced with poison. That's why we need to build new tables, places where nourishment doesn't come with a catch, where men don't have to prove they're worthy of being heard, where their pain isn't pathologized or punished. And that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in comment sections. That happens slowly, in rooms where people risk being real, in friendships where depth is safe, in spaces that say, you can show up messy here and you're still welcome. That's what dismantles these bomb shelters. Not shame, not force, not even logic, but invitations and presence and the audacity to believe that healing is possible, even when despair feels like home. The question isn't just why do they stay, it's where would they go instead? Because healing does not happen in a vacuum. It needs soil, it needs safety, it needs other people. But right now, for many men, especially those who identify as incels, there's no obvious place to go. And therapy feels distant or judgmental. Friendships feel superficial. Society feels indifferent or mocking. Dating feels like a battleground. And so when all the usual roads feel closed off, they retreat. Not because they're unwilling to grow, but because they've never seen growth modeled without humiliation or punishment. And that's where we come in. Because this isn't just an incel issue. It's a societal issue. It's a question of what kind of world are we building and who are we making space for it to be in? Are we building a world that only welcomes the polished and the confident, the desirable? Or are we building a world where the aching and the awkward and the afraid still get to belong? Because if we only make room for people once they become easy to love, we are complicit in the systems that keep them in hiding. But what if we chose a different way? What if instead of waiting for these individuals to be ready, what if we became people who could hold their not ready state with tenderness, not condoning the harmful behavior, no, and not excusing abuse or violence. That's not what I'm saying. But refusing to confuse isolation with evil. Refusing to believe that despair means someone is too far gone. Because here's the thing. Most of the people in these forums are not monsters. They're not ticking time bombs. They're people who didn't get the support that they needed early and consistently and without judgment. They're people who heard more mockery than affirmation, more rejection than resonance, more silence than curiosity. And if we want to reach them, we have to stop arguing with their ideology and start tending to their pain. And that doesn't mean tolerating hatred by any stretch of means. It means understanding where it came from in the first place. Because what looks like entitlement is often this mask for grief, I believe. It's what sounds like misogyny, but it's more like a desperate cry for relevance. And what comes across as narcissism is someone who's just never known how to receive love, potentially. So instead they just demand it, right? That doesn't make it okay, but it does make it human. And when we can see the humanity inside the mess, we can give these people a path back to themselves, a way home, out of that bomb shelter, out of the dark forums, back into risk and reward of connection. Because healing doesn't happen in hiding, and hope does not grow in echo chambers. It grows when someone believes that you're worth saving, even when you don't believe it yet. That's, I think, what we're called to offer. Not empty platitudes, not cold correction, but presence and patience and the kind of love that can sit beside pain without flinching. Because here's a final truth I want to offer you. If these forums are digital bomb shelters, then what other building is there to offer? It has to be a garden, right? Messy and alive and sometimes slow to grow, but a real and open place. And it's rooted in something that's deeper than fear. A place where men can bring their sadness without the shame, where they don't have to armor up to be heard. and where connection is not a prize for the lucky few, but a birthright for every human being who's willing to show up with honesty. That doesn't mean that the journey will be easy. It doesn't mean that everyone will want it. But it does mean that for those who are tired of the bomb shelter, who are starting to feel like the weight of their own numbness is pressing in, who are aching for something real, even if they don't know how to say it, there is another way. And it starts with someone choosing to not look away or not label them as lost, but to say, you're hurting and that matters. And let's find a way forward together. Let's invite you into this garden. That's the invitation. Not just for them, but for all of us. Because the way we respond to the most wounded among us reveals who we really are. And if we want to build a culture that's rooted in intimacy and integrity, we can't afford to look away from the places where those things feel most absent. That's where the bridge starts. Not with critique, not with blame, but with compassion. Fierce enough to sit with the pain and be patient enough to walk with someone who's in the midst of it. Not lectures, not the ultimatums, just love with stamina. Love that doesn't flinch when it hears the worst. Love that believes in something better. Not just in theory, but in practice as well. Because everyone deserves a place where they don't have to hide. Even the ones that we least understand, especially them. Let's bridge them back into this garden, shall we?